Welcome back, everyone, to the With Joe Wehbe Podcast. We are back again today. Intrinsic and extrinsic, we're deep. We've been talking about this since episode 86. You can go back to there if you want to get back up to speed on this section of the podcast. 13 to 15 minute episodes each is the average at the moment. Kind of good in bulk. People enjoy doing it in the morning, I know, on the commute to work, on a bit of a morning run. Some people use the podcast to put them to sleep. You know, how are you going to use it? Who knows? But hopefully it just fits somewhere. It can be anchored into the routine of the day. Just want to make this easy for you guys. And yeah, we've been heavy lately on, I'm just a big advocate of intrinsic, internal reasons for doing things, motivation and internal rewards rather than extrinsic. And I'm really hard on this stance. My life is a reflection of it. Right, so extrinsically, external wise, nothing will be that impressive about me for sure. But intrinsic is where I just focus all the time and attention. It's like if I do things that are intrinsically satisfying, it's like life is so defensible. It's so hard for things to actually go wrong and bring you down. So I'm just like so big on this. But again, this is what works for me. So sorry for the ramble. I don't normally ramble. I normally get straight into it. But every now and then, it's good to just reflect. But yeah, I want to talk about the benefits of intrinsic rewards today. Real simple concept. So instead of just talking about why extrinsic, not like that ideal, why they're risky, like everything might feel fine, sure. If you just love what you're doing for the status it gives you, the money, you might go your whole life unchecked, right? You might like the image you get on, all the likes you get on Instagram. There's so many different praise you get from your work. You might love all those things, but the problem with extrinsic obviously is that it's being decided by others. Value is being decided by others. So when their opinion changes, you've got to move with it. It's a moving target. It's more effortful and it's heavy. It's burdensome. That's the metaphor I used, the analogy I used rather, of the heavy leaky jars that leak. What did I say? Heavy leaky jars. Right? They're heavy. They're never full. You always got to maintain it. And it's burdensome. And that's how I think about extrinsic stuff and insecurity. So you've heard me talk episodes 49-ish, 50. The dates were like for those, I think 1st January 2021 and 31st December 2020, thereabouts, on interests. Scott McEwen and I, in our scope of work, we're just all about interests. Passion is not a word that pops up often, funnily enough. I know that's big in a lot of personal development spaces and motivation spaces. For me, it's more about interest. Interest is pure, and interest is always intrinsic, really. If you think about it, interest in internal. It's kind of got the INT at the start, which means it's part of the internal suite, which I love. And it means it kind of comes from you. Very hard to fake, especially over long term, being interested in something. Whenever I'm working with people, it's not a secret, it's the primary thing I look for is they're interested in what they're doing, because interest brings follow through. Interest is a pure engagement in the thing because they love that thing. So far, limited scope, but limited kind of runway, but so far that works for me. People are interested in the thing. They do it, I guess, for no money if they had their MVO covered. Sometimes I set up arrangements like that as a test. Would you do this if the only thing you really get out of it is being able to do it? And it was sustainable for you. MVO. So interest plus MVO, powerful combination. And again, this is just anecdotal, works for me. But that's the power of it because it comes from within. It's like a source of fuel that is regenerated internally. It doesn't need to come from the outside. It's not the leaky jars. They're never really that full. It actually is, put it this way, it's a sustainable, infinite resource of motivation and, curiosity being scratched. And that's how I think of, that's why interest is so intrinsic. Passion, on the other hand, has a lot more of an emotional, I think, dynamic to it, the way I understand passion. And emotion is much more fleeting. I love what I heard the other day. I think it might have been The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, the book, which is like, you know who's run completely by emotion? 3-year-olds and dogs. And that's why everything's so sporadic and chaotic. So that's the difference. So yeah, follow through is a big one. And it makes sense. That's the benefit of being intrinsically and interest-based with your rewards. Yeah. And I guess one of the notes I put here is like, if you want money or validation, if you want external things for what you're doing, it's really hard to motivate people to do something, because that means you have to give them a good financial incentive, most likely, to do everything you want them to do. Now, the reason you don't have to do that is most people don't actually work that way. But for some reason, when we're thinking about incentives, we always just resort back to financial and status-based incentives. Sometimes the incentive is just being able to work on that thing. So if people are just about money, and I used to find this in real estate, because real estate attracts a lot of short-term thinking because it's very flashy. It's got big shiny object syndrome, right? It's very flashy from the outside. And so you get a lot of people a little bit cutthroat. That's why it's got a bad reputation, because if you're here for the shiny objects, you're just going to beeline for the shiny objects, regardless of what kind of loops you got to, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Regardless of whatever dirty little deals you got to do along the way, basically. And so it's beelining directly to the outcome when you're in it for an extrinsic reward, which is why I feel like the intrinsic drive, the internal drive, like I enjoy doing it. Say I enjoy being a real estate agent. That sort of person's much less likely to cut corners. That's the phrase. Freaking hell. You'd think I'd be a bit more articulate by now. 95 podcast episodes. See, that's another benefit of the intrinsic I want to talk about. So follow through is a big one. But yeah, related to that, secondly, I'd say follow through, alignment. I'm jumping ahead a bit. But also like long-term players. You give them more permission to be a long-term player when you're intrinsically driven. So you'll be able to see and test this and see if I'm full of shit with this podcast, right? There's just no way this is going to become the Joe Rogan show overnight. Joe Rogan experience overnight, or the Tim Ferriss show overnight. It's going to have to be a really long haul if it's going to get more distribution. Like I just don't have time to completely just focus on it right now and do other things to kind of gain growth. So if I'm really into this for a genuine cause with no obvious money coming in the short term or anything like that, I'm going to have to be in this for a long run. And you'll be able to see if all the stuff I talk about is bullshit or not. And I love that accountability. I love my skin in the game for this. How could I make a podcast episode every fucking day? If it's about attention, because it's certainly not going to get me that much attention quickly. So how could I do the long haul? Most people don't go past 8 episodes when they start a podcast at the moment. It's the number I hear all the time. So long-term players. So you think Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger are just about money? They're still investing when they don't need to, when they're in their fucking 90s. Charlie Munger would be 100 soon. Long-term players. Intrinsically motivated. You must find fulfillment from what you're doing, because if you're extrinsically driven, you'll stop once you get the outcome. And that's why there's so much importance placed on in business circles on being mission-led. It makes completely perfect sense. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, so we've got long-term and I guess looking past just short-term, really basic outcomes and very easy measurable things to grander ideas. And we talked about follow-through. But yeah, the big one is authenticity and alignment. So they all kind of overlap, but that's the third category I wanted to talk about today. And for goodness sake, I'm sure there's more. It's just alignment. And I've found this, in my life. I can audit my experiences, I guess, since leaving school. And, the nonprofit journey, super aligned, right? Amazing lifestyle, amazing time in my life. I got into real estate. It's just a funny, I had so many things happen, so many things change, different business partners moving around, stuff like that. So it didn't end up being what I was meant to sign up for. So it was a real crazy topsy-turvy journey. But even within real estate, there's periods where I was doing things that I was uniquely better at. I think of being more creative and having more fun with it. And those times, quite aligned. And that fun just came from within. People weren't paying me and making it fun. Fun was like the way we were going about it. Whereas there's certainly other times I was just trying to fit in the real estate mold. Definitely not aligned, not fun, and definitely trying to gear towards outcomes. And then definitely, I guess, since COVID happened, I've talked about that a bit, like getting more into the podcast, more of my writing, focusing more on education. It's been really aligned then. And then even before nonprofit, uni, not really like number one kind of choice, I guess, on my list. So I felt that tension, and I called it 3 dead years in our book. So authentic and aligned life. So if you get to do a lot of things that intrinsically motivate you, it's going to be very hard for your life to be bad in general. To finish, there's a metaphor I used in the book, 18 and Lost So Away. It's coming out soon. And it was in my chapter, and it's called the Orchestra Metaphor. And it's basically this idea of you're born, metaphorically born in front of an audience. And you have no idea what you're doing, but you're up there on stage, and it turns out you're the conductor, because you're the conductor of your own life. Because you have no idea what you want to do, and you want to please all the people that are looking at you because they're kind of shouting at you, expecting you to play music. And you've just got this bunch of musicians behind you and all these instruments, and you don't know what you're doing. It's very natural to start listening to the crowd, also your fellow musicians, for what to play. But the crowd, the audience, all want something different. No one wants exactly the same thing. That's the extrinsic. Coming from the outside, everyone wants something different. So if you're trying to play to that, trying to appease that, you'll be moving from opera to stuff that's more upbeat, to jazz and blues, and you're just hopping all over the place because you just respond to the loudest voice you hear at any given point in time. That's if you're impressionable and just trying to please the crowd, that's how you play. Because of that, you only create noise. That would be bullshit. And if you're listening to the musicians, the people in your life, each of them just wants to play violin if they're a violinist, or drums if they're a drummer. They want a bigger part to play. So the people in your life, through no fault of their own, are biased to tell you to do more of the thing that they think's best for you, which is normally in tune with their instrument. The lawyers tell you to become a lawyer. The doctors tell you to become a doctor. So on. And then what I guess I realized with this analogy is that you start living when you start blocking out what people are saying. You don't mind if the people leave, and you start playing the music that comes from you. You learn how to compose, and you learn that you can't listen and get it from the outside. It must come from within. And then once you start conducting, you control the musicians in your life. You ask them to play a role in your life, just like you can in theirs. But this is your performance. And now it's consistent and it's clear. And because it comes from you, you're enjoying it, and enables it to all flow really well. And then maybe people are going to leave. Maybe musicians and the audience members might leave. But what will come back instead are people who now want to be part of your song. And suddenly you've refilled the room with people who like the music you play if you are playing for no one. And what I call one of my favorite blog posts and ideas in general that I've ever talked about or put my spin on and published is the audience of none. They are happy to watch what you would perform for no one. And that is the purest advertisement and endorsement I can make for following primarily intrinsic drives and seeking intrinsic rewards in your own life. So the question, what's something small that you're listening to the crowd for? And what are things that intrinsically motivate you that you do for an audience of none? And then you can think about how much time you're actually spending on those things right now. And then you can think about what you're waiting for, which is the hard question to answer, and I'd still do this. And then you can realize, you don't know how much time you have on this planet. So you got to follow the last episode and maybe start thinking about your bucket, just giving it competition, because it's hard to make big jumps and moves. But it's easier to take small steps that are going to lead eventually. It's like you want to design a website, something you always want to keep putting off. You just design the header. You just focus on doing that first, and then you feel like doing the rest of it. This has been the With Joe Wehbe Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you again tomorrow. And remember, as always, that the best way to open 1,000 doors for you is to concentrate on opening doors for others. That's it. Goodbye.